Thanks for coming out, everybody. Strand has meant a lot to me over the past decades, and I'm thrilled to be here.
Yes, I mean, the Strand, for those of us who were here back then, this is sort of like a chapel at this point, because it's actually survived and thrived, and, and so here we all are. One of the things I want to point out, the cover of the book, because I think it says a lot about the book. You were clearly the Timothy Chalamet of your time.
Ah.
When I look at the photos, there's a kind of there's a kind of glam. You have a kind of classical look. At the same time, it's a downtown look. But one of the things that's interesting to me is that even though we never met until tonight, we overlap in a lot of the people we know.
Yes.
And the scenes we were in, and all of that. And I wanted to read a very brief passage that'll sort of. There's a passage on page 421, and I won't mention the person's name in case they're here, but the passage begins with you on a sofa making out with someone, and when I read it, I went, oh, I knew her. She's a friend of mine, and it's those little piquant details. But then from there we go to the Mud Club. And you talk about a new club that's open called the Mud Club, situated on a dark industrial street with deserted alleyways, very noir, darkness stained with light. Inside, a whole new crop of arty kids getting high. A climate of narcotics, neurosis in the air mistaken for energy. The new pissiness. Saw a fresh new band from Athens, Georgia called the B-52s. The singer wore a seersucker jacket and white bucks like he was going to a Southern country club dance. Pencil mustache. Dancing to their single Rock Lobster. Afterwards, we had chocolate egg creams and cheeseburger at the brightly lit Dave's Luncheonette on Canal Street. Saw the Cramps play the Mud, and Victor Bacchus and I went down into the basement dressing room. They were ghoulish and sweaty, and Lux Interior made a running dive, catapulted over the back of a couch, and landed on his head on the cement floor. Knocked himself unconscious. Poison Ivy looked on uninterestedly. These guys are hardcore. On the next page, you go over and visit Kathy Acker. Yeah. Then you go up to Kathy Acker's talk at some college where she was doing a reading or something.
Bard.
Yeah, and you heckle her.
Yes.
And she's actually not bothered by the heckling at all.
She was the only one that wasn't.
Yeah. And then that night, your girlfriend at the time, hearing voices in her head, stabbed you.
Yes.
Now, I just want to point out that in the course of 4 pages, we have the Mud Club, B-52s, Lux Interior getting a concussion, Kathy Acker getting heckled, and you getting stabbed. I mean, Paris in the 20s does not compare to this.
Thank you.
And one of the things, every section, when you went back and looked at this, did you say, my God, I packed a lot into those years?
Yeah, it's definitely busier than the 21st century's been in that regard. I haven't been stabbed in a long time.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's interesting about the book is all of these things that happen, and I think this was a very 70s thing. It's not that you're blasé, but you kind of take things in stride. It's not like, oh, this happened, I have to start to re-examine my life and what it means. You're kind of like, oh, the next night, on we go.
Well, that's how it was, wasn't it? Back then, you just roll with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept reading biographies of people, which would kind of mirrored my life.
Mm-hmm.
So I just thought, well, this is what happens, This is the kind of scrapes one gets into. Mm-hmm. So I thought, I think I'm doing the right thing.
Well, one of the things that I think makes diaries so invaluable compared to, say, memoirs, although memoirs could be, have their point, is that when you're doing a diary, you're doing it as it happens.
Right.
So there isn't the temptation. When they do memoirs, they reframe their life
Right.
in terms of what happened later.
Yeah, it would be hard not to.
Yeah. And
there was a real lure to put postscripts to a lot of these stories because there were sequels that would happen sometimes 30 years later.
right.
But I had to hold back because I didn't want to ruin the integrity of the, what's it called, a primary document, I guess. So.
Now, how is it? Is it that because in pre-social media, everything had to be done through human connection? In other words, you went out, you met this person. On the way back from meeting that person, you met this other person. Then you went uptown to their place and hung out.
Yeah. Yeah, it was all kind of happenstance. Because there were no, I didn't even have an answering machine, let alone a cell phone, or there weren't cash machines. It was, if you were out, you were out. So you followed the night where it went.
So what was a typical nightlife, if there was a typical night, or did it depend on the year?
Yeah, definitely on the year. In those early years, I might hit Max's and CBGB's on the same night. And if you went between the two, you'd kind of see everybody that was in town or everybody you meant to see. And yeah, and then later, the Mud Club took care of a lot of that kind of thing. But yeah, a night usually consists of 3 things, maybe. So a film, a club, and another club, I guess. All without any money to speak of.
Well, also this could all be done because, it was so cheap to live in New York.
Yeah, very cheap. $300 or $400 a month was plenty, and you could stay drunk for all 30 days on that too, if you did it right.
And also, it was a much more nocturnal life. Yours especially seems much more nocturnal.
Yeah, and getting up at noon or 2 in the afternoon, that was pretty normal. I never had a job. I was an illustrator, so that was helpful. So if I had a job, I might get a job at 4 in the afternoon, and it would be due at 10 in the morning. So I'd try to get it done by 10 so I could go out.
Right.
And then deliver it to the New York Times in the morning or something like that.
There are so many people in this book who are like famous names we now take for granted. But one of the things it's interesting is because you were sort of meeting them on your own terms, there isn't the sense of, I never got the sense of hero worship from you, although maybe there were heroes that you met then.
Yeah. And that I didn't necessarily, do terribly well with, like Brian Ferry.
Yeah.
I kept meeting, and it, always amounted to zilch. Whereas Allen Ginsberg I kept meeting, and that always amounted to some kind of seduction scheme of his. That wound up at zilch, too. But yeah, when I got to Manhattan, there wasn't a lot of place for kids. There was Max's, and then you'd go see the Dolls wherever they were playing.
Yeah.
And you'd kind of find your own people. But there wasn't, you didn't have a lot of choices. And so the record companies would throw these great parties for the big bands like Pink Floyd and Alice Cooper and Hawkwind and Bad Company and stuff like that. So the thing was to try to get into those parties,
Right.
where you'd meet other people that had crashed that party. And when I met Danny Fields at a Dolls gig at the Waldorf Astoria, he took me along to a lot of that stuff. So it was kind of like Oz in a way, because a kid couldn't get in to where the action was unless you had a mentor or something to let you in.
Well, another thing that's totally gone is that people forget is the rock music world, the record industry was so big then.
Right.
And they had money to burn.
Yeah.
So when they threw a party, it would have a great buffet.
Yeah.
And you would see rock critics loading up on the buffet. They arrived with their doggy bags.
Right.
And so it was like, but that was how people subsisted, if they weren't making great incomes.
Yeah.
Or they would sell their records.
Yeah, I remember there's one in the book. I think Lance Loud took me to a party for Aerosmith at 30 Rock, and it was actually in the skating rink. And there were beautiful waitresses with big trays and champagne, and apparently the record company Aerosmith had just played The Garden, and none of us went because we didn't like Aerosmith, but we liked the party.
Yeah.
And there was Andy Warhol and Taylor Mead, and anyhow, it was fantastic. And I remember Andy saying, "Oh, this party costs $15,000," and it seemed like $300,000. It was like, wow. But anyhow,
yeah. No, I remember at the Bottom Line, they always there was a rock critics list.
right?
So everybody wanted to get in. But the key was, as I found out, was that you had to, if you showed up for the early show, you might only get on the 2 drinks freebie.
Right.
But if you went to the later show, the thing was you try to negotiate your way onto the free dinner one.
Right.
And so that was like how a lot of writers planned their week. Like, I know I'll get a good meal on Wednesday because
Right.
it might be a terrible band. Now, the places you live, what was the worst place you lived in?
I guess this apartment on Thompson Street between Bleecker and Houston, and it was by the men's shelter, which is now a fancy co-op. But so there were winos on the corner who would always, yell faggot at me as I walked past. And 50,000 cockroaches that were even in the freezer. I mean, and just like chilling. And the toilet ran, and the hot was cold, and the cold was hot, and sloping floors, and all it was Italian neighbors, and who I guess worked. I can't remember what the deal was, but my roommate, Eric Lee, and I would tiptoe in at night on our, glam rock high heel boots. But we'd tiptoe up the stairs, but then they'd come out and they'd say, "This has got to stop. What's the noise? You can't do this. Come on, you don't even belong here. This is our neighborhood." And I was going, "Yeah, we're trying so hard to be quiet." And they go, "It can't go on. It can't go on. We got relatives, you know what I mean?" And, I was like, "Yeah, we know what you mean." So that was pretty bad. I mean, my bed was by an air shaft, and there was it was kind of great. I loved it because it was real bohemian. There was an alley cat below, and through the air shaft you could hear, Italian women, yelling at their kids, "Angelo, you get up here in 5 minutes or you're gonna get whooping." And you could smell garlic and, all that kind of stuff. So I thought, I've made it. I'm not in suburban Minneapolis anymore. This is Greenwich Village, So I thought it was very romantic. But a year was enough, and I moved to 16th Street, which was nicer.
Did you, in terms of making a living, making a career as an artist, and as a writer, did you ever have a plan? Because I get the feeling that now everyone is supposed to have a plan, a mission. And reading the book, it seems very haphazard in a way that ended up working.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to be a professional artist, whatever that meant. I didn't, and I only knew a couple. I mean, I knew my teachers, but they were teachers. And I didn't really want to teach, but, you know, you could see David Hockney and Larry Rivers. They were having these big careers. And you know, I liked their work, and I thought, you know, it can be done. I remember going to a party at Rivers one night. He wasn't there, and I had the run of the place. I went in his office, and in the, I was snooping. Anyhow, in the inbox were checks from that week, and they were like 5 checks, and they amounted to $1 million, which seemed like $1 billion.
Yeah.
And I just thought, wow, that's so cool. And then I was wandering around his studio, which was empty. It was just me. And you know, so I knew it could be done. Not that I've done that, but I have managed to not get a job all these years. So, but yeah, it was all trial and error, and there was no template for it. And I've taught a teeny bit at SVA, not lately, but yeah, the art students of today, they want to know how to do it, and you can take courses at CalArts and theory and, you know, art business and all kinds of things that didn't exist. Because when I was at Bard, you know, I asked my total college education cost $24,000 for 4 years at Bard and Parsons, which was a lot. That was about as high as educations went. And I said to my painting teachers, what do I do when I get out of here? And they said, well, you know, bartend, drive a cab. Do you know any carpentry? And I said, nope. And plumbing? Nope. And I said, that's it. And it's for $24,000. And he said, yeah, that's what we did. And then, you know, maybe when you're 30, you get a show. And I thought, 30? Who's going to live to be 30? I thought, that's not... So anyhow, I said, what if I was an illustrator? And they went, oh, if you did that, you would never be an artist. No, that would be the kiss of death. Because, you know, it was that Soho, macho, abstract, He-Man kind of thing, purist, you know. But I loved magazines, and illustration in the 70s was great. And I wasn't as good as most of those illustrators, but I thought if I could, you know, if I could make $100 a week doing that, that would be enough. And that's pretty much what I did throughout the 70s.
Also making art then was not considered this sort of aesthetic thing where you went off and didn't, you know, locked yourself in a studio and had no, you know, it was almost like the throes of creation. And I mean, one of the things reading your book is that you're running into artists all the time.
Right.
You know, they're out in the world. They're out on the scene.
Right.
I mean, tell us about meeting Hockney, about David Hockney.
Oh, well, I met him a few times before it registered on him that we'd met. But I met him, I mean, the time that really stuck was I was at Weiland's bookstore on 8th Street. And I'd had a dream about him the other night, because in 1975, he was terrific. I'm not so keen on, you know, the 80s and after, but he was really a guiding light, and getting away with figurative painting in his playful way, and using art history and, you know, European glamour, and I just thought, oh, he's great. And anyhow, I had a dream about him. I go to Weiland's, there he is. So I went up and I said, I had a dream about you last night. And he said, did you? And so I gave him my card, which said, Duncan Hannah, painter of pictures, which he thought was amusing. And he said, well, why don't you come over for tea tomorrow? I'm staying with Henry Geldzeller. So I did. And they were looking at me like, you know, cats look at mice. And then they took me to a dinner party at Robert Miller's. And anyhow, all that week, Hockney was kind of at loose ends. He was on his way to Bora Bora. So and he had no agenda. So he had these 5 days to kill. So he killed him with me. And he was so great. He never condescended. He seemed unaware that he was, an internationally famous artist. He was so kind and generous. And then I think the day before the end, he came to my apartment on 16th Street and looked through my work. So we'd been having all these great conversations about Courbet and Hillieu and obscure French painters and this and that. And then he looked at my work and he didn't say anything, and he lit a cigar. I played Frank Sinatra records. We had tea, and he left. And I thought, ooh, that's not so good. And then he called me later and he said, meet me at Balducci's. So I did. And he was picking up a few things, and and as we left, I said, hey, David, you didn't say anything. And he said, I know. We've been talking for days, and you're a smart guy, and it's been really enjoyable, but, what I saw falls short of your capabilities because you seem to be concerned with the zeitgeist, and it's weakening you, and you just have to get down to work and just draw all the time and not worry about style or originality, which I'm sure you're thinking about. All young people do, but just forget it and just make honest paintings. And here's the thing, your personality will come out. You don't have to force the issue. It will come out, and it will come out so much stronger if you do it that way than trying to impose this kind of cool thing on top. And that was very sobering. So I took it to heart, and I got rid of my gimmicks. And I think he was right. It was great advice. And hearing it from the oracle was especially important. So I thought that was very kind. And the next day he went to Bora Bora, wrote me a postcard every day because he knew I'd treasure them and things like that. He's great.
On a perhaps a level that wasn't very helpful, I feel like in all such occasions we should all tell our Tom Verlaine story. And yours is that Tom Verlaine basically interrogated you in a way that was meant to tell us, you had done something for, and I can't believe this existed, the television fan club zine.
Well, it didn't exist, but so I was friends with Richard Hell and Richard Lloyd, and tangentially Tom, who was not a very friendly guy, and Terry York, their manager, who was my pal, and he said, hey, you're at every gig, why don't you write it? Why don't you start a fanzine? And fanzines, I don't even know if they existed then. I said, you mean like a fan club? Who's going to join a television fan club? And he said, no, it'll be a goof. It'll be like conceptual art or something. And just, do it. Make it as arty as you want. And so I wrote a kind of a stream of consciousness introduction to the television fan club. And Richard Hell came over with a bottle of peach schnapps and read it and was laughing. He said, we were made for each other. This is great. I love it. And then we went to see a Sam Fuller double bill at the Bleecker Street Cinema and smoked pot in the back row, and great. And then he said, of course, Tom's got to clear this. So meet Tom tomorrow night at Max's. So Tom had his own booth in the back, and I went in there, and he said, so you wrote this thing on me? And I said, yeah, Richard really likes it. And he said, okay. So wait, so let me get this straight. So you get out and you picked out that shirt to wear, right? You picked that out in your closet? I went, huh? And he said, so it's like blue with white polka dots. So you put that shirt on, then what? Then you go over to the mirror and you look in the mirror and you smile at yourself with that smile you've got, and then you say, I'm Duncan Hannah. He said, do I have that right? Is that how it works? And I said, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, well, I'll tell you what I'm talking about. you don't know me, and you will never know me, okay? Do you have that straight? And I said, yeah, I think I'm getting the picture here. And so he said, so that's it, so just forget it. And I said, okay, loud and clear, gotcha. So I got up and I walked over to Danny Field's booth with this, hangdog look in my face, and he said, what's the matter, baby? And I said, oh, God, Tom Verlaine. And he said, yeah, he's an asshole. What did I tell you? The day I met you, all musicians are assholes. He said, when are you going to learn? I said, Anyhow, so that was but we went on, I tried out. They tried me out to be the drummer. But, I don't know, a couple months later, because they were thinking Billy Fica was a little too busy. And so I did play with them for an hour one day, which was great fun, but I didn't get the gig.
Yeah. One of the things that distinguish your book from a lot of other books is there's a lot of sex in it. And it's a lot. And there's a lot There is. Well, compared to some others. But the thing is, it's actually sex that's sort of taken. There's a rakish, picaresque quality to it. And I was wondering if you ever felt guilty that you were enjoying all of that sex then, when so many people on the scene were pining away, hoping for. Did you have any? I mean, nothing is terribly explicit, I should say.
Yeah. Well, everything's relative. Mm-hmm. I mean, I knew a lot of guys who were having, 5 times more sex than me. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like a competition or anything. But, and I've never remembered the punk rock era as being particularly sexy. Mm-hmm. Because it was more about being fucked up than sexy.
Yeah.
But, as I went through these diaries, there are some skirmishes that had a colorful quality that I could hardly leave out.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and as everyone points out, it was pre-AIDS. It was just
and consensual.
And consensual, yes. and boogie nights and all of that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about one particular incident, because to me it really captures a lot of the book in a nutshell, and that is the night you went to I think it was an Academy of Music, you went to a concert, and you ended up in a cab with Andy Warhol.
Right.
Who was it? Who else was in the cab?
Well, it was Roxy Music was at the Academy, and then Ahmet Ertegun was throwing them a party at Larry Rivers' loft. Mm-hmm. And that was, so we all had to try to figure out how to get into that party, because that was like it. And I got in with Jobriath, the space age gay glam rocker.
Yeah.
And anyhow, once I got up there, everybody was there. I mean, John Phillips with Genevieve Waite and Nureyev and Fontaine and Andy Warhol and Brian Ferry and David Bowie and all the Warhol superstars. It was fantastic. But it was also open bar, and I was, just guzzling away. And it was kind of winding down, and Andy Warhol said, hey, we're going to the 82 Club. Do you want to come? And I said, who's we? And he said, Brian Ferry and David Bowie. And I said, yeah, I'd like to come. So there was a hired car outside, and we got in, and I thought, I think I got on the rumble seat maybe, and I was staring at these 3 guys thinking, wow. So we went to the 82 Club, which was a drag bar on 3rd Street, I think 2nd Street. Where the punks had been having showcases, and so I walked in. There was a line to get in. I think the Dolls were playing that night. So I walk in with Andy Warhol, Brian Ferry, David Bowie, that ilk, me. But I was my legs were, I was losing my motor skills.
Yeah.
So upon entering, I thought, I better sit down on this bench for a minute. So I stretched out my legs, and I tripped the bouncer who was a really hefty lesbian, truck driver or something. And she just picked me up. And Jabriath actually came over and said, "Don't throw him out. I'm as drunk as he is. If you throw him out, you might as well throw me out," which I only found in the diaries. But anyhow, I remember being picked up, carried up the steps, past that same line I just passed with my new glamorous friends, and she literally threw me in the gutter. And I kind of rolled a couple times, and I was, with my shoulder against the curb in the gutter. And I thought, wow, I'm finally in the gutter. I made it. This is the gutter that Oscar Wilde was talking about. And then blackout. I don't know anything until about 5:30 the next morning. And I'm in a fifth floor abandoned building on I didn't know it yet, but 135th and Lenox, which was not a good neighborhood in 1975. And so I looked out the window and there was, rubble, and I had no idea where I was. And I looked, there was no furniture in the room. There were no window casings. There was no nothing. I mean, just, dirt. And I was in my party clothes, double-breasted suit, bow tie, little rouge, brilliantined hair. So I started wandering down this stairwell, and there were no doors in the apartments, and no nothing. And I thought, am I dreaming? I'm in a nightmare. This is a nightmare, except there was hot, blasting June sun coming in. So I finally hit this street and was wandering around. Nobody's around, and this guy's walking up to me, and I thought, humans. And I said, "Excuse me, sir, could you tell me where I am? And he burst out laughing. He goes, "You're in the wrong part of town, motherfucker." He goes, "And if you didn't look like a sorry-ass clown, I'd kill you." And I said, "Thank you." So I kept going, found the 135th Street and Lenox subway stop, and thought, wow. And no money, no memory, and fifth floor, too.
Yeah.
It's very peculiar. Anyhow, I hopped a subway, because my first day of work at a French bakery called Sutter's was starting. I was a cashier boy, and so I had to go home, change, get to work. Overshot my stop, wound up in the Battery Park landfill in my party clothes, and was trying to take a shortcut. I thought I could run up to Thompson Street. So I'm crisscrossing this landfill, and this Caterpillar tractor turned on its axis and started chasing me. And I thought, that guy's not following me, is he? And I thought, he is. He's following me. So I started kind of sprinting, and he picked it up. And I looked back, and he's grinning like mad because he's got this, party boy in his sights, and he's going to run me over. And I was thinking, God, this nightmare never ends. And, immediately thought of North by Northwest and the crop duster. So I'm like, running along, bow tie flying in the wind. Anyhow, I finally made it. But that night, it just went like from the best to the worst in just a matter of hours.
Now, I don't know how we're doing on time, so I don't know what point we want to get to questions, audience questions. But one thing I wanted to be sure to ask you was, when you were going through this, because obviously a lot of the people in the book are now dead. Some of them died very young.
Yeah.
And when you were going through the book, were there people that you thought that you really missed, that you were sort of surprised? Like who do you miss from that period?
Well, my friends, when people die prematurely and good things happen, you think, oh, God, I wish so-and-so was, they missed it. Why'd they OD on a speedball when they did? They should have been here for this. This is good. So, all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. I don't know. Like Eric Emerson, he's kind of a walk-on in a lot of these early years, and then I can't remember was he killed by a hit and run driver, or did he OD? I think somebody threw him in a dumpster, and that was the end of him. But, I mean, yeah, everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, it was very dangerous, and there were a lot of fatalities, and more to come.
Yeah.
I mean, the 80s was worse.
Yeah. Well, I always, that all 4 original Ramones died. And
right.
The last one, the original drummer died. He died the latest. He had left the band, but,
right.
It's kind of incredible.
Right.
And yet, at the same time, I'm reading it and I'm thinking, well, some of these people are still here, which is very,
Some of them are in this room.
That's right. So do we want to take questions from the audience? Are there questions? Or
If anybody wants to be brave and go first, just raise your hand and I will do my best to bring you the mic. Easy.
If you could go back and live it all again, but you'd have to live it all again every second.
Same way?
Yeah.
Would I?
Yeah. Would you do it?
Well, I mean, I'd rather go back and do it differently. I mean, I guess that's youth for you. I mean, even at the time, I was conscious of trying not to waste my youth, but you can't help it. So I was trying to savor it and appreciate it. I mean, I guess Fitzgerald said youth is wasted on the young. And I knew that quote, and I thought about it. And yet, it was wasted anyhow. I mean, so many missed opportunities, but so many, I don't know, so much great happenstance at the same time. So I don't know, some of it was painful and some of it was a riot. And I mean, I guess I would, is the answer.
Anybody else? Oh, more in the front.
Sir?
So a lot of this talk is about parties and late nights and all of that, but a lot of my favorite part of the book were simply the lists that you kept of the films you saw and the records you listened to and the books that you read. And there's a lot of cultural overachievement and hunger in that. You were obviously really, really hungry to ingest as much culture as you could. Could you talk about this and how the hell considering your intake of various substances, how could you would you find the time, not to mention the consciousness, to read all those books?
That is a good question. I would read in the morning for 3 hours or so, and for some reason you go through those phases where you're a good reader, and I remember reading You Can't Go Home Again by Thomas Wolfe, which I bet I couldn't even read today. But I just thought it was galvanizing, and he wrote it on my block on 15th Street. And I remember he was writing about the garbage trucks clanking down the street. And, I could hear garbage trucks clanking down the street. And I was just, I don't know, I was electrified. I was a better reader then than I am now because I could totally submerge myself. And because I'd kind of botched my years of education, I thought I better give myself my own education. So, anyhow, I just thought all this stuff would be good for me. And I was really turned on by books and movies and shows and culture. And I knew, I figured that I would somehow synthesize all this stuff and find myself.
Did you think it would make you a better painter in some strange chemical way?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was hoping. I remember sitting through a Bertolucci movie called Partner twice, which it's not one of his best, and it's might be hard to sit through it once. But I sat through it like hoping the osmosis of it would turned me into Pierre Clementi somehow. So I was very impressionable in that way, and I wanted to be a sponge, and I was. And my first show in 1981 was kind of like a group show of me trying on this and me trying on that. And over the years, that's gone away, and I kind of miss it. It was fun to, walk in other people's shoes. And now I find it difficult to do. I'm kind of stuck with myself. So it's the way it goes.
Okay, do one more in the front, and then I'll try to make my way back.
Obviously, so many of these stories are New York stories, and many of the events that happened in this time period couldn't happen today. So much about the city has changed. What's one way you think the city has changed for the better, and one way for the worse?
Oh. Well, it's safer now, which I guess is better. I like the High Line. That's a nice thing. Let's see. But worse, there's a lot worse. In the 70s, anybody could move here. It wasn't, you wouldn't have to ask yourself, can I afford it or not? And now the city is so much about money. And in turn, money has changed the way people look at art and how much does it cost and what was the last auction record and things like that. And, money's the bottom line. And in the 70s, when, Gerald Ford to New York dropped dead, it was kind of great. We were broke and money just wasn't a part of it. I think money does corrupt. And this is kind of a money town now. And, kids can't move here like they could. And, you just didn't have to worry about a career so much. As I found out, when I first moved here and I meet all these very marginal people like Lee Black Childers and, all these people were somehow supported by something in New York City. And they were nuts. A lot of people worked for David Bowie, and Danny Fields worked for Datebook magazine, and people found a way of making these, incomes, and sometimes with expense accounts. And anyhow, I don't think that would happen now. Everything's gotten so professional, and also because of that, it was definitely more eccentric, because when people got into stuff, they weren't thinking about a monetary reward at the end of it. They were just thinking of their esoteric search for its own self, for its own, and maybe nobody would applaud or, but everybody I knew was looking for some kind of authenticity, and we were studying, our forefathers and the past and different scenes in New York and other cities, and there was nothing in it for us, which was, that was kind of the best thing, is that we were just this continuum of bohemia. And I don't know. I don't think that search is going on so much anymore with the youth of today. But then I wouldn't know.
And a question in the middle here.
You lived through a lot of scenes that changed every couple of years. I'm thinking Mercer Art Center, CB's, No Wave, each with a different vibe and spirit. Do you remember them being like hard turns or transitions, just sort of a constant churn?
Yeah, it was just a, organic morphing of things. But I remember at the end, the Mud Club, as you read at the beginning of the thing, there was kind of a new neuroses, and there was a darkness that was settling in that wasn't as, didn't have the joie de vivre of the early days, I think. In a way, all these, there was so much about a lot of these scenes that was, bad vibes. People didn't necessarily like each other, and there was warring cliques, and the junkies hated the drunks, and the drunks hated the squares, and the no waves and the new waves, and the which when I used to read about, I was really into Paris in the 20s, in the 70s. And, you just read about all these people in a room, there's Man Ray and Brancusi and, Modigliani and, on and on and on. And just think, how fantastic. Why was I born in 1952 and not in 1905 or something? But, it's probably the same then, too. And you don't, I didn't realize that from reading history. I mean, having lived now through something that is a history, I realize that obviously you can't believe everything you read because, it wasn't necessarily like that. I mean, I've read a bunch of accounts of the 70s that I couldn't identify with at all. But I could identify with James Wolcott's book, Lucking Out, about the 70s, which is spot on.
Well, I would just want to say one thing that I think was a really clear point of change and had been building up was the deaths of Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen, because you felt that was the culmination of certain dark forces.
Yeah.
And, when you saw them propping each other up in places, you knew it was not going to end well. You thought they would OD, not that it would end the way it did.
Right.
But
yeah, it was only a matter of time. I mean, I wasn't very enamored with them, but just the adulation they were getting even while they were still alive. It's like, oh, look who just came in. He's like, ugh. They were sweaty and drooling and blah. And you just think, yuck. And I mean, I remember the night Sid gashed Patti Smith's brother in the eye with a broken bottle at Hurrah, and he almost lost his eye, and he was out on bail. I mean, he was on bail from Rikers Island for the Nancy's stabbing. And I just thought, this is coming to this? I mean, it was like, it's a drag. Is this who we are? This is great. Wow, cool. It's blood, cops, blood, anyhow.
So, anyone else?
Time for one or two more. Anybody in the back? Oh, I'll come around.
You were talking about happenstance sort of ruling your life without giving away your next book.
Oh.
Do you look back on some of those choices you made through happenstance and say, oh, what if I just grabbed that opportunity, or, that was a moment that I, should have embraced, or, oh, I'm glad I didn't do that, or there's anything that just sort of pops in your mind about that?
I mean, no one instance, but certainly lots of regrets. I remember I was in a movie in 1993 that was shot at Bard. It's called Art for Teachers of Children. And I played Jock Sturgis, a photographer. And anyhow, it was 2 weeks shooting at Bard, where I'd gone for 2 years. And I was filled with, kind of sorrow at the way I'd behaved at Bard, just being such a jackass, when I could have, there was so much to take advantage of that, I was really interested in, T-Rex and drinking beer. And, I just think, well, that was kind of a waste. But anyhow, I have journals that lead up to now, and I'm hoping that I'll get a chance to edit my 80s journals, and then the 90s, and then the aughts. But that depends on money, I suppose.
Anybody else have one last question? Anybody
Don't
at
be
all?
shy.
Excuse me. Did I miss somebody? Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Here we go. Just
Carol.
in time.
Hi.
So do you think all of this would have happened to you if you hadn't been so pretty?
That's an interesting question. No, it certainly gave me a pass in places I couldn't have gone otherwise. And I remember feeling when feminism was on the rise. Anyhow, I felt very sympathetic because I'd been hit on a lot, and I knew, the upsides and the downsides of being prey. Yeah. So yeah, it was. Yeah, but mostly it was a blessing. It gave me access to things that wouldn't have happened otherwise, which I'm grateful for. Thank you.
We're definitely grateful that you were both here tonight. So
Thank
thank you
you.
for all your questions, and thank you so much to Duncan and Jim.